Imagine being torn from one home to another, your life controlled by strangers, your body no longer your own. Now imagine giving birth again and again, each child born into a world of chains and cruelty with no promise of safety or love. One woman endured this nightmare, not once, not twice, but across 5 plantations, her life hidden in dusty records, forgotten by history. Today, we will uncover the truth, piece by piece, and reveal the story of a mother whose strength defied the horrors of slavery, a story that was never meant to be told. The story begins in the early 1800s, deep in the heart of the American South, where a young girl was born into a life she would never have chosen. Her parents were enslaved, bound to the land and the whims of plantation owners, and from the moment she could walk, she was thrust into the relentless rhythm of work. Fields of cotton and tobacco stretched endlessly under the burning sun, and from dawn until dusk, she labored alongside adults, carrying water, tending the crops, and learning the harsh rules of survival. Even as a child, she understood the fragile balance of existence. One misstep, one act of defiance could cost her life or the lives of those she loved. She watched other children grow up too quickly, their laughter fading beneath the weight of labor and punishment, and she learned that hope had to be a quiet, hidden thing, carefully guarded, because the world around her offered no mercy. By the time she reached her early teens, the grim reality of her life became even crueler. Her body, though young and fragile, became a tool in the hands of those who profited from slavery. She discovered that she would be expected to give birth, to bring life into a world that would claim both mother and child. Her first pregnancy came as a mixture of fear and uncertainty. Nights were filled with dread. Would her child survive? Would she survive? The other women on the plantation, those who had endured the same suffering countless times, offered guidance and comfort, but no amount of advice could erase the reality that her life and the life of her child were not her own. Every day, she labored from sunrise to sunset, the sun burning her back and the overseer's whip never far from reach. Every sound, the clash of tools, the cries of children, the sharp bark of orders, was a constant reminder that she was trapped in a life dictated entirely by others. Even under such brutal conditions, sparks of resilience emerged. She clung to small moments of humanity, a stolen glance at her family, a whispered word of comfort, a fleeting laugh among children, but each moment was precarious, always threatened by the cruelty surrounding her. She witnessed punishments inflicted on others, lashes, public shaming, and relentless labor, and she learned to hide her strength, to endure silently, because to resist was deadly. And yet, even in the shadows of fear, she began to understand that her survival and the survival of her child depended on an unspoken determination, a quiet courage that refused to be broken. Decades later, historians would uncover fragmented records of her early life, hidden in ledgers and plantation documents. These papers, written by people who never saw her as human, preserved her story in the barest details. A child born into bondage, a mother giving birth under the most unimaginable circumstances, a woman whose life was slowly being cataloged in numbers and dates. They revealed her existence, the children she bore, and the hardships she endured, each entry a silent testament to her resilience. Though the records were scattered, they formed a map of suffering, a trail that would later allow historians to connect her story across multiple plantations. These ledgers hinted at a life that was far from ordinary, a journey that would take her from one place of bondage to another, each move carrying with it new hardships, new children, and new heartbreaks. As the first chapter of her life comes to a close, the stage is set for a profound and heart-rending journey. She had survived her earliest years of enslavement, had borne a child under the most impossible conditions, and had endured the constant threat of separation and punishment. But the world she knew was about to shift dramatically. The first plantation, which had been her home and her prison, was no longer the end of her story. She would soon be torn from it, forced onto a second plantation where life would become even harsher, where more children would be born into bondage, and where her endurance and courage would be tested in ways she could never imagine. The records, silent and patient, waited to reveal her journey, piece by piece, across a system built to break the human spirit, yet unable to extinguish it entirely. Her story, hidden in plain sight for generations, was only beginning to emerge. The young woman's life, already defined by hardship, was soon uprooted as she was forcibly transferred to a second plantation. The reasons were simple, cruel, and unfeeling: profit, labor needs, and the ever-hungry system that treated human lives as commodities. She was torn from the familiar fields, from the few comforting faces she knew, and thrust into a new environment where every day promised new challenges, and every person she met might wield power over her life. The second plantation was larger, harsher, and more merciless than the first. The overseers were brutal and the labor unending. Fields of cotton seemed to stretch infinitely, each row a reminder that her freedom had been stolen before she had even begun to understand it. She labored from dawn to dusk, her body aching, her spirit tested, but she carried within her a quiet determination to endure, even when the work seemed impossible and the threats of punishment hung over every action she took. Pregnancy came again, as it had before, yet now in a world even more unkind. The second child she bore entered a life governed by violence and neglect, a life where survival was never guaranteed, and love was a fleeting, stolen luxury. She gave birth surrounded by women who had endured the same relentless cycle, who offered whispered counsel and shared sorrows, yet could do little to shield her from the harsh reality of her existence. Nights were long and fearful. She worried endlessly about her child, about whether she could survive the next day, about the endless chain of plantations that seemed to stretch before her. She began to understand that her story, her life, and the lives of her children were being meticulously cataloged in the ledgers of the plantation owners, small notations that reduced her existence to numbers and dates, but which now serve as the only surviving proof of her endurance. Her forced journey did not end with the second plantation. In a twist all too common in the grim calculus of slavery, she was moved again, this time to a third plantation, where the work was even more grueling and the overseer's cruelty seemed to increase in proportion to the distance from any place she could call home. The third plantation became a prison without walls, a place where every field and every building was a reminder of the control others wielded over her life. Each child she bore became another link in the chain of her suffering, yet also a testament to her resilience, a symbol that even in the harshest circumstances, life could persevere. As she labored and gave birth, she also bore the weight of grief for the children who were lost, for the family she would never see again, and for the life that had been promised to her but stolen by a system that treated her as property. The historical records from these plantations, discovered decades later, reveal the staggering reality of her life. Ledger entries show her name alongside the births of her children, dates marking each new arrival, each one a quiet declaration of her existence amidst the machinery of oppression. The records, cold and bureaucratic, contrast sharply with the human suffering they document, yet they serve as proof that she endured, that she survived transfers, pregnancies, and unimaginable labor, and that her story could not be erased. Each transfer from one plantation to the next magnified her hardships, yet also highlighted her unbroken spirit. She became a living bridge connecting multiple plantations, her life an unwitting testimony to the cruelty of the system, but also to the human capacity to endure, even when hope seems impossible. By the time her life on the third plantation had settled into its relentless rhythm, she had borne multiple children, each one born under circumstances designed to rob her of joy and security. Yet despite the cruelty, despite the pain, she found small ways to survive, to protect her children as best she could, to maintain a semblance of humanity in a world determined to strip it away. Friends, allies among the other enslaved women, and fleeting moments of tenderness became her lifeline, the thin thread connecting her to a sense of purpose and resilience. And though the third plantation would not be her last, it solidified her role as a mother, as a survivor, and as a woman whose life, though catalogued in distant ledgers and archives, would one day reveal the full scope of the horrors and endurance that defined her existence. As Part 2 closes, the story pauses on a moment of quiet reflection, a brief reprieve in the storm of her life. She had survived transfers, pregnancies, and the harshest labors of the first 3 plantations, yet the system that bound her had not finished its work. Ahead lay the 4th and 5th plantations, each one promising more suffering, more children, and more heartbreak. And yet, even in the face of unimaginable cruelty, the woman's quiet resilience remained, a testament to the strength of those who were determined to endure, to survive, and to bear witness to the human spirit in the darkest of times. By the time she was brought to the 4th plantation, the young woman's life had been defined by loss, suffering, and relentless labor. Yet nothing could prepare her for what awaited on this new land, where the fields were even larger, the overseers harsher, and the punishment swifter. The plantation itself seemed to stretch endlessly, a sprawling expanse of cotton and tobacco, each row a monument to a system that thrived on human suffering. Here, the cruelty of slavery was magnified, not only through the physical demands of labor, but through the emotional torment of being uprooted again, forced to leave behind the few familiar faces she had clung to for comfort and solidarity. She arrived weak from the last transfer, her body already marked by years of toil and multiple pregnancies. Yet the new plantation demanded more than near survival. It demanded complete submission, obedience under pain, and a quiet acceptance of a life in which she had no control over the smallest details. Pregnancy struck again, as it had on previous plantations, yet this time the stakes felt even higher. She bore another child into a world that had never known mercy, a world in which her very survival was uncertain. The pain of childbirth mingled with the exhaustion of endless labor, and she often feared that she herself might not see another sunrise. The other women on the plantation, many seasoned survivors of this relentless system, offered whispered guidance and shared stories of endurance, teaching her small techniques to conserve strength and protect her child as best she could. Nights brought little relief. Even when the workday ended, her mind was filled with the constant worry of children already born, the uncertainty of their future, and the looming threat that she could be separated from them at any moment. Every creak of the cabin, every distant shout of an overseer reminded her that she was never truly safe, never truly free. Despite these horrors, she found ways to survive. She concealed moments of tenderness and joy from the watchful eyes of those who sought to crush her spirit. She formed quiet bonds with other enslaved women, shared knowledge of survival, and drew courage from the smallest victories: a child who survived infancy, a day of work completed without injury, a whispered word of solidarity in the dead of night. The 4th plantation became a place where the line between endurance and despair was razor thin. She had already experienced life on multiple plantations, but here the weight of her suffering and responsibility grew heavier. She was now not only fighting for her own survival, but for the survival of all her children, each one a fragile hope in a world designed to extinguish it. Historical records later revealed the full scale of her life on the 4th plantation. Ledger entries, birth registers, and transfer documents showed the continuation of a story that was being cataloged almost mechanically, yet each entry represented a human life, a mother's struggle, and the fragile survival of her children. These documents, once buried in archives, now allowed historians to trace her path and understand the staggering endurance she exhibited. Each child born on this plantation was both a testament to her strength and a silent witness to the cruelty of a system designed to break her. Even as her body and spirit were pushed to the limits, she persevered, drawing from an inner resilience that had carried her across 3 previous plantations. The 4th plantation also brought a deeper understanding of the systemic cruelty of slavery. She saw how families were separated deliberately, how children could be sold at the whim of an owner, and how any act of resistance or independence could result in severe punishment. The psychological toll was immense, yet in quiet moments she nurtured what she could of her humanity, sharing whispered stories with other women, holding her children close, and finding ways to survive each day. Her life on this plantation was a brutal exercise in endurance, a test of strength, courage, and resourcefulness. And yet, amidst unimaginable suffering, her resolve remained unbroken. As Part 3 draws to a close, the woman stands at the center of a life that has been uprooted and reshaped countless times. She has endured 5 plantations, borne multiple children, and survived hardships that would have crushed many. But the system that controls